If you enjoy blasting aliens with lasers, chatting with space weirdos, and collecting shiny sci-fi junk, then both The Outer Worlds 2 and Starfield have got you covered. But their specific visions for the future of space exploration couldn't be more different. One is seemingly built on hope, and the other on despair. Ever since the release of Fallout New Vegas, with the inevitable comparisons between that game and Fallout 3, it feels as though there has been a quiet and largely amicable battle raging between Bethesda Game Studios and Obsidian Entertainment, as they vie for control of the open-world action RPG throne. Some might say that neither of these studios deserve to be anywhere close to that throne anymore, but as someone who adores the past and present work of both, I beg to differ. And as much as the specific focuses of their games have diverged dramatically in the past 10 years, I still think it's fun and downright interesting to put the two side by side and illuminate the various faults and victories of each of their recent sci-fi RPGs. Though Starfield was announced in 2018, they were beaten to the space RPG punch by Obsidian, who released The Outer Worlds in 2019. And while that game had its charms, it did feel deeply compromised in a way that its recent sequel doesn't. The Outer Worlds 2 is an intricately crafted, consistently surprising and cynical journey, while Starfield, on the other hand, is a vast, complicated and idealistic space epic. It seems to me that while The Outer Worlds 2 is intended to shock, Starfield was designed to inspire awe. So which of these two games ultimately delivers best?
Something in your eye? Got an eye wash around here somewhere, only a little expired. All right already. I'll tell you. Whatever you want, just stop that.
Now, clearly, Starfield and The Outer Worlds 2 are two very different games in countless ways I'll soon get to, but they also probably have even more in common than you think. To get the obvious stuff out of the way, both games allow players to explore and complete quests across a number of planets alongside a variety of companions, and while using dozens of weird weapons to eliminate any threat that comes your way. Both games feature dangerous experiments, complicated wars, interplanetary travel, and weird religious cults, even if the approach to these narrative elements feels very distinct. Neither game has sentient aliens for you to chat with, but both have shady corporations doing evil stuff. Neither one is free of loading screens, but both will allow you to wear a silly hat. In either Starfield or The Outer Worlds 2, you can land on a planet, kill an alien, buy and sell some loot, chat to an NPC, accept a quest, finish a quest, sprint, jump, shoot, chat, level up, play first person, play third person, sprint, shoot, and fall to your death. In terms of the fundamental gameplay options available to players then, these two share a very obvious RPG lineage, and yet they also feel very different to play. I actually feel very conflicted when jumping between Starfield and The Outer Worlds 2. Because I really love both of the experiences on offer, but also find myself frustrated with several elements. There's a part of me then that desperately wishes these two games were somehow combined into one. I just feel like if we could make the introductions between Starfield and The Outer Worlds, then they might really hit it off, and then who knows, a few years down the line they might give birth to the perfect space RPG called the Star Outer Worlds. It's possible that they wouldn't get along though, since at their core the two games were built around very different premises and with very different game design priorities. Starfield's main story, and indeed the tone that underpins the entire game, emerges from a place of hope and hunger for discovery. Its world seeks to inspire and impress players with the mysteries and wonders of our little corner of the Milky Way galaxy. It may not always succeed in doing so, but the intention is always there. At its best, the Settled Systems feels like a realistic, if a little idealistic, projection of humanity's future. The major downside of this optimistic tone, of course, is that Starfield's many stories rarely allow the player to divert dramatically from its chosen paths towards reconciliations or revelations. You do have a lot of options and choices in the game, but this is not a galaxy where you can regularly create chaos or be truly evil. In the Outer Worlds 2, however, the player is given dramatically more freedom to dictate their story, and can very easily find themselves dealing with bad outcomes and hilariously terrible consequences. The game's main story centers initially on a sort of quest for revenge, but you can go about getting there with a fairly level head or a lust for violence and carnage. These Outer Worlds aren't built on hope, they're built on greed, insanity, and cynicism. Fairly early on in the Outer Worlds 2, as I attempted to cross a bridge and progress the main quest, I chose a dialogue option that very quickly led to both of my companions becoming indisposed, seemingly for the rest of the game. It was a terrible choice to make, but the game did let me make it, because its world is built to accommodate such awful behavior wherever possible. I couldn't possibly imagine such an option ever being available in Starfield though. Basically any slightly evil act will result in your party members leaving you, but in Starfield this doesn't feel like the natural reaction of the game world. It feels like you're being reminded that your actions don't align with the main thrust of this narrative. After all of Starfield's major companions are aligned with the same faction, Constellation, so their ethics are all pretty strictly goody two-shoes. I still think the major companions are mostly interesting characters, but they don't feel as diverse as your options in the Outer Worlds 2, where the varied alignments of your crew give you the freedom to behave like a goody two-shoes or like an evil lunatic if you want to, and feel supported or challenged either way. In Starfield, your companions may forgive you once or twice if you ask really nicely, but if you keep being evil, the game basically just becomes less and less fun to play as it takes away more options. While in the Outer Worlds 2, aligning more or less with one or another companion can make the outcome of any given situation very different, and you never feel like you're being pushed to act a certain way. The game always feels like it's ready to respond with full force to however you want to play things. Of course, it makes sense that the Outer Worlds 2 is more easily able to accommodate more diverging paths for the player to take because it is ultimately a smaller game in several ways. For a start, while Starfield allows the player to visit over 100 star systems at their leisure, the Outer Worlds 2 is set entirely in just one star system. And as a result, you're going to spend a lot more time on each of the game's handcrafted planet maps rather than jumping regularly between planets and systems like in Starfield. I think it's probably possible to forget that you're even playing a sci-fi game at times with the Outer Worlds 2. Precisely because, in combination with the game's stylistic choices, you can spend a very long time on one planet doing things that wouldn't be out of place in a fantasy RPG like Avowed. Even though the Outer Worlds 2 feels a lot bigger and better than the first game in almost every way, it's still a lot more focused than a game like Starfield. That's definitely not ultimately a bad thing though. It just means its focus is in a different place. The Outer Worlds 2 doesn't really care about scale, it cares about density. much the opposite to Starfield's vast galaxy of content. Jumping between these two specific games really gave me a new appreciation for the ridiculous sense of scale on display in Starfield though. The space travel mechanics, as clunky as they may be, divide the galaxy and its star systems with so much vast open space. And any random planet you land on, even if it is largely covered with familiar generic content, feels absurdly big, and there's always something uniquely affecting about knowing you'll never see all of it. And I haven't even mentioned yet the options for ship and settlement building and crafting and the other dynamic systems that make the game so massive. The Outer Worlds 2, on the other hand, really lets you see everything and check it off your list if you want to across a few playthroughs. You're playing on a smaller stage here for sure, but there's a lot more room for things to go wrong in very entertaining ways as a result. And on average, the things you'll find while traveling are more unique or amusing than in Starfield 2. Even if it does feel like your exploration is more heavily predetermined and less specifically sci-fi than in Bethesda's space RPG. It might be a huge oversimplification, but to me, Starfield feels like a space game made by Bethesda, while The Outer Worlds 2 feels like an Obsidian game set in space. Much like with its storytelling, Starfield's aesthetic is also firmly rooted in the real world. The ships and the space stations and most of the game's settlements emphasize utility first, with panels and screws and buttons prioritized over decorative elements. In The Outer Worlds 2, on the other hand, the aesthetic is deeply and consistently informed by a very distinctive retro-futuristic Art Deco diesel punk style. Much the same as the first game, settlements and outfits and weapons all appear to have been ripped from the pages of pulp sci-fi magazines from the 1940s. It'd be unfair to suggest that the game prioritizes style over substance in its design, but they definitely have built a more stylized world where things regularly look larger than life or excessively cool just for the sake of looking cool. This definitely isn't a bad thing, but it does result in a world that feels less real and more fantastical when compared with Starfield's more grounded NASA-punk approach. For many, though, this will simply translate to a game that feels more fun more regularly. But I think the real issue with The Outer Worlds 2's Arcadia is that the style is just a bit too consistent across its worlds. In Starfield, Neon, New Atlantis, Sidonia, Dazra, and Aquila City, along with several other smaller locations, all feel connected but distinct. Most locations in The Outer Worlds 2 feel cut from the same cloth though, and while that does make sense in this overly corporatized hellscape, it can result in things sometimes feeling a bit samey. Which is not to say that Starfield doesn't have its own samey elements, especially when it comes to the on-planet exploration and the great deal of radiant or minor side quests. Even if the worlds of The Outer Worlds 2 don't feel that distinctive though, the writing in the game is consistently more engaging than in Starfield because you never quite know what to expect. It regularly leans into the silly, but can also offer some surprisingly human moments in the midst of the chaos. Few lines of dialogue feel wasted here. Conversations will always alternately push the story forward, deliver much needed exposition, or provide moments of levity. And companions will regularly chime in to express their approval or disapproval of whatever's going on, while also regularly being in conflict with one another. Starfield has plenty of conflict and it does feature some great silly elements, but on the whole, as a more grounded space RPG, the writing can often feel like it meanders between bureaucratic niceties and unnecessary background information, while also struggling to deliver the pith or wit. It still has its charms and has more than a few good tales to tell, but I'll always maintain that Starfield's greatest storytelling can be found in its backstory and world building. Everything in The Outer Worlds 2 feels like it's happening now, and you're part of all of the action as it's evolving. While in Starfield, you're exploring a galaxy that is largely at peace, but has been through a lot to get there. And I think both of these approaches are interesting in their own ways. Starfield gives you the freedom to make its world your own, but it never really gives you much influence over the story. While The Outer Worlds 2 allows you to tell your own story, but its world never feels like it's yours. Starfield, to me, then, consistently inspires a sense of awe, while The Outer Worlds 2 always manages to shock. One game makes you marvel at the wonders of the galaxy, and the other reminds you how great humanity is at ruining such wonders. But which game scratches the space RPG itch better for you? Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more games. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.